on, Jimmy. Who are you going to fight against when this balloon of yours goes up?
Forces of anarchy, wreckers of law and order.
See?
Communists, Maoists, Trotskyists, Neo-Trotskyists, Crypto-Trotskyists, union leaders, communist union leaders.
See?
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
So, Don, why is 1967 important?
Well, I think it's important because last year there was a great deal of media interest in the anniversary of the 1967 Sexual Offences Act. And it was depicted as the decriminalisation of homosexuality. Though, in truth, of course, it wasn't the decriminalisation of homosexuality. What was decriminalised was homosexual men over the age of 21 in private was made no longer a criminal offence. But everything that gay men did to get into the room with each other was illegal. It continued to be. Soliciting for an immoral purpose, licentious dancing, etc.
Licentious dancing?
Yeah, etc., etc. So it legalised what nobody ever got caught for. If Oscar Wilde was brought up under the terms of the 1967 Act, he would face a larger sentence, maximum sentence, because, of course, everything Oscar Wilde did was illegal under the 67 Act. The truth of the matter is that everything that gay men did, as I say, to meet each other, get off with each other and so on, was in one way or another unlawful under the terms of the 67 and continued to be so. So the interesting thing about the media attention to the 67 Act was that it somehow wants to see the emancipation of homosexuals as proceeding from the legislative change in 1967.
So, Don, do you see that as a pivotal moment in 1967, or do you think it's given more attention than it deserves? Or
I think it's an important piece of legislation for this reason, and that is that once it was realised that if it was okay for homosexuals to be with each other in private, then it must be okay, logically, for them to do everything that's necessary for them to be in private. So it opened up the question within 5 or 6 years that homosexuals should be able to meet each other publicly, should be able to dance, etc., etc. So it was a significant piece of legislation in that respect. But, of course, the real opening of the struggle for the emancipation of homosexuals in the modern period comes in the early 1950s with the prosecutions of Wild Blood and various other leading personalities like journalists and so on were arrested for cottaging. And this alarmed the authorities in the sense that it led to the Moral Welfare Council of the Church of England suggesting that there should be reform in 1952. So the emancipation of gay people legally emerges actually from the Moral Welfare Council of the Church of England.
That's quite the irony.
It is, because they were concerned that these otherwise respectable members of the middle class and the upper middle class were being criminalised. And so what flowed from that was the Wolfington Committee. And the Wolfington Committee took some years to make its recommendations, but it made its recommendations in 1957. And in 1957, they advocated a process of decriminalisation, which it then took another 10 years to achieve in 1967. So there's a whole long process of the decriminalisation ideas and arguments, which had nothing to do with liberation or with equality.
So do you think that this was a moment was because it was a legislative victory rather than, say, a campaigning victory or an activist victory? Or do they coincide, do you think?
Well, I mean, it was a lobbying victory. I mean, there's the sense of the influential, the great and the good around the Church of England, the great and the good in certain liberal and legal circles were involved, and the Northern Law Reform League, which was a homosexual organisation that later became the Campaign for Homosexual Equality much later, they actually did lobby intensively over the years, but there was no public activity or public campaigning.
So like no demos, no protests?
No, it was
too dangerous.
I suppose there was the old adage that older homosexuals used to say when I was coming out was it was important not to frighten the horses in the street. that was the idea, that somehow this had to be. It was an advance that could be approached through liberal intellectuals, really. Rather like opposition to hanging. We all know that the masses believe in hanging, but in fact we're not going to allow them to have hanging. We're going to abolish it. Right, and in a similar way, there was the general fear that the general society was not ready for homosexual rights, but we intellectuals are. Right, so there was that sort of tension. But I think none of this takes into account the fact that society in these years was undergoing massive changes, absolutely huge changes in economic and social life.
And do you think, how do you think that manifested itself? What was the conjunction between economics, social life, that laid the groundwork for sort of gay liberation to ultimately take place, or if not necessarily liberation, steps towards gay liberation take place?
Well, if you think about the fierce discipline, moral and otherwise, of working class life in what might be called the industrial age.
Fierce discipline, that's an interesting phrase.
Yes, so it's a fierce discipline imposed upon people, both by trade unions, by working class institutions of all kinds, and by employers, and by the nature of the workplace. People in the past worked in typing pools, vast rooms composed entirely of women sitting at large manual typewriters, with a supervisor sitting at the front, disciplining everybody. And it was a completely rigorous and open form of discipline was imposed upon people in a typing pool. Similarly, that was women, but similarly in tool-making workshops or industrial workshops of various kinds, workers all operated in big rooms, in big spaces, with charge hands, foremen, supervisors of all kinds, imposing rigorous discipline.
A bit of hierarchical?
Absolutely a hierarchical situation in which rigorous discipline was imposed upon people. And the trade unions, of course, reflected that with a hierarchy of dues collectors, shop stewards, conveners, and so on. So there was a corresponding hierarchy within the trade union movement as well. So in that industrial world, in that world that dominated the 1950s and had actually been in place since probably the 1880s, whatever, that kind of social structure was opposed to difference. It was absolutely necessary for people to be the same. Difference was regarded as dysfunctional.
So abnormal,
and disruptive,
and disruptive.
Disruptive and dysfunctional. And the capitalist class believed that. Consequently, all their moral laws and moral codes and so on, both formal and informal, were all calculated to discourage difference and to see it as disruptive. And that was similarly the case in the labour movement and in the trade unions. that unity was unity. It was unity of people who should not get above themselves. They should all be stick together in the same room that they worked in, the same pit, the same village, the same working men's club, etc., etc., etc.
So solidarity, or the conception of solidarity, was quite conventional, quite narrow, quite homogeneous. Would that be right?
Yes,
Fair
absolutely. Was certainly conservative. Yes, and that dominated the whole of one's life. And in fact, you can see in a number of literary works and movies and so on by the end of the 50s that this is beginning to be challenged. In kitchen sink dramas and so on. There is the idea of resistance against this homogeneity and this idea of a homogeneous working class life and so on. And this, of course, is also disrupted then racially. Is disrupted by the arrival in large numbers of Afro-Caribbean people, which then disrupts and dismays large, traditional working class communities in all sorts of ways. More important, of course, is the rising in living standards and the changes in the structure of industry. So living standards rise throughout the 1950s into the 70s. There were ups and downs, of course, but living standards rise. And at the same time, there is a rise in clerical and administrative and salaried occupations, also increase with a corresponding decline in industrial occupations. So there are technical and social changes taking place in society that disrupt the idea that homogeneity and is what we're striving for, and difference is dysfunctional. This is beginning to be disrupted on a massive scale, both racially, both in terms of
so we're talking
gender.
The 60s, late 60s from this.
Well, no,
moment.
the late 50s.
The 50s.
The late 50s.
Also, kind of culminated in 67.
It culminates in that. But of course, there are big changes culturally taking place. There almost tectonic shifts take place between the late 50s and the late 60s.
For example, music and.
Well, no, I'm talking about the underpinnings of society. The emergence of a wider cultural disruption of the previous arrangement of things. The arrangement of the industrial world was being broken up, right? As was the empire was being broken up with the wind of change and Macmillan in 57, 58 rather, and the progressive breakup of the empire was also part of this process. So there was a massive changes both in the oligarchic arrangements of the way society was organised and politics was organised. You only need to listen to the accents of people interviewed on BBC Radio or whatever, and in the movies of the period to now to realise how extraordinarily hidebound this society was. In fact, it was so hidebound that I worked in a job in the early 60s in Southwark in London.
What was the job?
And the job was I was working as a clerk in an office calculating the discount ratings on piles and piles of dockets. The kind of job that could be done now by an Excel spreadsheet, a formula in an Excel spreadsheet. But in those days, there were 20 lads and a chief clerk sat at the front. But in this particular firm, Ray Bastos Balacco, there was a lift, and people of my rank were not allowed to ride in the lift. but being a ballsy kid, I always rode in the lift, and nobody in the lift dared, none of the superior people in the lift ever dared to question my right to be there, except I was taken to one side by the chief clerk, because they'd obviously made complaints to him about this. And if you said that now to a young person now, they look at you as if you were mad. The very idea that a 16 or 17-year-old kid working in a big office block couldn't ride in the lift because of their rank would be considered utterly mad and bizarre.
There was a kind of a quiet case system in Britain back in those days, wasn't there?
Yeah. And so those kinds of changes were just extraordinary. They were mad, these kind of impositions, which are all to do with an externalizing of control, really.
And how did this manifest itself in, I guess, gay life, in the gay activist movement? Was there more freedom?
Well, no, there was no more freedom. There was extraordinary repression, which continued up to 1967 and after it. The difference was that this breakup of this world, of this highly regimented world, the breakup of this world resulted in much wider discussion of sexuality, for instance. Not homosexuality, but of sexuality, much wider discussion of it. And the emergence of a discussion of an explicit discussion of homosexuality comes in behind this.
So you had perhaps like the feminist movement coming to fruition, and
you get the invention of the contraceptive pill, which comes, I think, 1961, something like that. So you get the emergence of much more effective contraception, a much wider discussion of sexuality, and also, of course, at that time, young people went to I started full-time work at 15, and young people had incomes and were more or less independent of their parents by the time they were 18 or 19, unlike now. So the discussion of sexuality, the way in which people related to things, was opened up, and consequently there were a number of movies and plays and so on that raised the question of homosexuality.
What for you would be a good example of those plays or those movies? Because it might not be.
There was a movie in the early 60s called Victim, which was about the blackmail of a homosexual man. There was later in the 60s there was the killing of Sister George, which was about an actress in a soap, a lesbian actress in a soap opera, who was written out of the soap opera. She was killed in an accident in the soap opera, but it was about her relationship and the world and so on. So there were a number of things going on. A number of discussions were beginning to take place. But it took an unconscionable length of time for it to dawn on the authorities that difference was not dysfunctional, and the gay movement that everybody or most people are aware of, the idea of gay liberation and so on, emerges from the riots in New York in 1969.
Is that the Stonewall riots?
In the Stonewall riots in New York, and that in London that resulted in the formation of the Gay Liberation Front, late 1969, 1970.
It's quite an interesting story, that, isn't it? What happened at the Stonewall riots, wasn't it? I mean, it's a story of how basically police were sort of barricaded into the Stonewall pub.
They were doing the usual thing. They were just raiding the place and harassing people, and so there was a riot.
It was a tipping point, effectively.
There was a riot against them. There had been a riot earlier on the West Coast of people which couldn't be taken up as a cause célèbre because it was mainly transsexuals and transvestites and so on, and they were utterly disreputable people. And it's rather like when the the Black Liberation Movement in America, they chose the woman who sat down on the bus. What was her name? I forgot.
Rosa Parks?
Rosa Parks. In fact, there was a number of women before Rosa Parks, but they were single parents and weren't respectable and so on, so they were never taken up by the movement.
So you need your poster childs, yeah?
That's right. So the Christopher Street riot and the Stonewall Bar became the cause célèbre that was kind of respectable.
And that then helped precipitate, you feel, change in Britain?
Yeah, well, it resulted in there being the emergence of a movement in Britain, and that movement comes out in fact the Summer of Love and the idea of the 68 and so on. So all these young people are discussing sexuality and free love and so on is being mooted and discussed, and homosexuals, in order to participate in this, had to come out. There was no way. Right? There was no way of
your contribution was going to be more stronger if you actually were gay. Yeah.
You couldn't participate in this unless you came out. And so the old homosexual world, which continued for many years afterwards, of surreptitious encounters, closed gay bars, and under the carpet kind of life, which continued but could not actually articulate the need for reform and so on in any dynamic way. So the gay liberation movement starts, as I say, in London, and then spreads to a number of provincial cities and centres, and makes the issue discussable, basically. Discussable in trade union branches, in the Labour Party.
That's a start, right? That's a start. It's not maybe not livable yet, but it's
that's right.
Step in the right direction.
That's right, absolutely. And so these changes go on, but these underlying changes that really bring about the change actually accelerate. Of course, there's the whole process of deindustrialization, which is headlong in the 80s. And the whole emergence of a modern economy in which it finally dawns on the employers that communication and difference are key questions. They're not dysfunctional to the accumulation of capital in any sense whatsoever. Right? And in fact, the modern workplace, even if you work for a huge enterprise, a huge company, the modern workplace is a relatively small number of people working together, where teamwork matters, where good communication matters,
compromise,
and engagement with the superordinate goals of the employers matters. Really engaging the personality with the job actually matters in a way that you couldn't do in an engineering workshop or in of the old type, or of a typing pool or whatever. You couldn't expect that in the old world, but in the modern arrangement, because of technical and social changes that takes place, that actually different races, different religions, different genders, and so on, is no longer a problem.
And did you feel that this was, at the time, just for you personally even, how did it feel? Did this feel sort of somewhat emancipatory? Was there something liberatory about it, or was it helpful?
Well, to start with, I think in common with most people on the left, one didn't recognise this was happening at all. I'm being wise after the event here. But I don't. I think that, we believe, certainly in the 70s, we believed that equal rights and emancipation of any sort was impossible under capitalism. We didn't understand that capitalism was about to go through the most astonishing changes that would result in the legal emancipation of homosexuals. I mean, legal emancipation is one thing; real emancipation is a different matter, of course. But And we don't get that until the intervention of the major
things
government.
felt pretty much the same, even despite these incremental positive steps.
They changed very fundamentally with the emergence of the struggle takes place within the Major government. Major didn't succeed in getting anything through because of the House of Lords and various reactionary Tories, but Major tried to do things, tried to equalise things, and that the baton was then handed over to Tony Blair and then Cameron. And Tony Blair and Cameron completed the process. So we got equal rights by about 2014, I think. And so
the Lib Dem coalition.
That's right. So there was the process was the legalising of the age of consent. So legalising that, taking it down from 18, it had been moved to 18, but down from 18 to 16. So it was the same. It was equal with heterosexual age of consent. The equalising of the age of consent, the right to civil partnerships, and then the right to marriage. This then completes the.
So in the 70s, you were still feeling part of a conventional world as a gay person.
Oh, absolutely, yes, yeah. And the penalties for coming out openly gay were considerable, in terms of losing jobs and etc.
This must have felt intolerable.
Well, yes, it was intolerable, most homosexual people actually manage this carefully by a double life, by discretion, and so on. Whereas, and that was a problem. Of course, if you were campaigning for change, you couldn't be discreet. Right. So that was so for people like me, that was the decisive problem.
Yeah. So you were born, as you said, you were born in 1945. You said.
Yeah.
Right. So post-war baby, basically.
Yes.
Baby boomer almost, probably.
No, even before a baby. I'm older than the baby boomer.
Are you? Okay. Okay. I didn't notice. So you were of a generation that was very much entrenched in sort of very conservative, homogeneous values, and that was your lived experience.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So I grew up in that world, in the world of homogeneity, so to speak.
Yeah, and it becomes your normal, doesn't it?
Yes, that's right. So the radical gay movement, the gay liberation movement of one kind or another, was composed of very marginalised people, by and large, who were intrinsically eccentric. I mean, you couldn't be anything else, right? And so people hung on to the margins of society in various ways, in squatting and so on, and in terms of theatre groups and various activist milieu. The mainstream, respectable kind of gay campaigning doesn't start until the end of the 80s, when Margaret Thatcher introduced Clause 28.
Okay, so Clause 28 is, could you just explain what that is?
Yes, Clause 28 was an attempt to prevent young people and school children discussing homosexuality. So Clause 28 was about making it illegal to discuss homosexuality in schools and to instruct children in the whys and wherefores of homosexuality. There was a campaign then against that, which resulted in a lobbying group called Stonewall, which was put together by the great and the good. All of a sudden, lots of actors and leading gay personalities came out as gay. They hadn't been out before, but they suddenly came out. And this was in the context of the AIDS crisis as well.
I meant to ask about that.
Yeah, it was in the context of the AIDS crisis, and that so the great and the good finally came out.
So it became a bit more fashionable, a bit more trendy.
And they were certainly not marginal people. They were leading personalities in the arts and in literature and so on, and in intellectual life. And so they started Stonewall as a extraordinarily successful lobbying group, which certainly eclipsed all the efforts of the gay liberation movement of earlier times, if you see what I mean. And so it then takes a completely different shift
So by the 80s, I mean, you talked about you alluded to the sort of the AIDS crisis and how it sort of affected the gay community and the perceptions of the gay community probably more so. What was happening in the 80s, you think, in sort of terms of the development of capital? Was there a new sort of economy coming in under Thatcherism and Reaganism in America that fed into gay activism?
Well, I don't know that it fed into the gay activism, but what it actually did was it broke up the old world decisively. And the trends that were beginning to happen in the 50s and the late 50s into the 60s absolutely decisively happened in the 80s in Britain. It was in the 80s that the coal industry was destroyed in the Great Coal Strike, that printing was destroyed by digitalisation, Fleet Street was destroyed, dock labour that was engaged in struggles in the early 70s to try and survive against containerisation was swept away. So all the old props of the old industrial structures, which supported the unions, supported the traditional attitudes towards the Labour Party and so on, were swept away in the 80s. And at the same time, of course, we got Ziggy Stardust. We got all these marvellous things that were appearing from the 70s into the 80s culturally.
New Romantics and
that were completely much more powerful in their influence than the gay liberation movement. In fact, that's the truth of that.
Yeah, so they made it more normal, I think. The idea of difference more acceptable or palatable.
And well, it was challenging. I mean, I remember going to see oh God, I've forgotten his name. Lou Reed here in Manchester, and I was living in Bradford at the time, and I came over to see Lou Reed at a concert in Manchester, and the whole crowd was completely into the idea of glam rock. And so there were all these. I was sitting in the Gods in this theatre, and I suddenly realised I was actually surrounded by a load of football supporters. But because they all had powder blue clogs and were slapped up to the eyeballs, they all you got the impression that somehow they were different. But of course, they were deeply disappointed by Lou Reed because Lou Reed came on, and after he collapsed once, and then he managed to recover himself. But he was just a white face in a black suit, so they had quite misunderstood what Lou Reed, the Velvet Underground, was all about. But it was very interesting, that collision between the popularizing of glam rock and of all these ideas, and the way that collided with all sorts of social assumptions that these people actually continue to have. But
yet,
so,
at the heart of it, in the backdrop of all of this during the 80s, was Thatcher's government's Clause 24. Was it? No, sorry.
Clause 28 was later.
28, yeah.
No, Thatcher's attack on the unions and her attack on the idea of the public sector and so on was all from day one, from 1979 onwards. That's what Thatcher was about. But in fact, of course, Thatcher did not make British coal uncompetitive. She didn't actually mean that ensure that the steel industry had to close and so on. These changes were global. They were
so it's the rise of globalization.
Huge rust buckets in America too. It wasn't. Margaret Thatcher was the politician that articulated the change and the need to change. She didn't bring about any of those changes. Right. That's the point, And what was villainous about Margaret Thatcher is she didn't make arrangements for dealing with the consequence of change. So you could close down all these coal mines, but she made no arrangement as to what you were going to do.
What would happen to the community?
What would happen to Barnsley if you close all the coal mines down? She made no arrangement for that. That's what was criminal about her, not the fact that she was bringing about these changes, because she was merely responding to vast changes that were taking place anyway. So vast technical changes were taking place in the organisation of the workplace and in the nature of industry and so on. So it's in that context that the old disciplines of the working class, the old sexual and social disciplines, the norms of community, of neighbourhood, and so on, were broken down, and consequently, it became easier for people to articulate different kinds of life, different ways of living. So lesbians, and not just lesbians, but feminists, the whole position of women, the whole struggle for women to live a different kind of life emerges very, very powerfully in the 70s and 80s. The idea of homosexuals living a different kind of, being able to live a different kind of life. So everybody was open up to the possibility that you didn't have to live in the way that your parents did, the way that your family did.
Yeah, so you don't have to culturally reproduce.
That's right. And so,
and therefore there was more freedom.
And so Ziggy Stardust and all the rest of them were absolutely, emblematic of that you didn't have to be the same as the past. That the future was not going to be the same as the past.
Do you think in sort of the gay rights movement or in gay activism, there's a tension, in some sense there's this desire to be different because you are different from the convention that was existed at the time, but does that then sort of butt heads with the idea that you need to sort of normalise it and make it the new tradition?
Well, I mean, I think the tension that you're alluding to is that nobody ever gets what they fight for. They always get something else. Right, and so gay liberationists fought for gay liberation. We were against marriage, and we were against this, that, and the other. We were against the family, and so on. What we actually got was incorporation into the wider heterosexual reality. Right, so our legal emancipation has resulted in the recuperation within the system, and so homosexuals are now the same as everybody else. As Dolly Parton said when she was asked, what do you think about gay marriage? And she said, well, I don't see why they should be able to get out of it. They should put up with it like the rest of us.
Good old Dolly.
I thought that was very cute. She's a marvellous woman, but I thought that was a very cute way of dodging and dealing with her constituency and her fans, which are terrible reactionary rednecks on the one hand and metropolitan homosexuals on the other. So she was able to address both constituencies in this very astute way.
Well, she's a very smart businesswoman.
That's right. But the interesting thing is that there's a lot of bewailing among homosexual radicals of my vintage about the loss of edge and about the loss of radicalism and so on, and that being gay has become mainstream. And of course, you can't have it both ways. You can't fight for equality and fight against discriminatory laws, and when you get them, then complain that the police are marching in their uniforms on gay pride parades,
So in 1967, then, did you think that could happen?
No, it was inconceivable. It was absolutely inconceivable. The idea that the police or the RAF lads or the fire brigade or whatever would march on a gay pride parade in their uniforms was inconceivable.
So you're glad to see it now?
Yeah, I am glad to see it now. I mean, and so I'm glad that we've been incorporated in certainly illegal and in major metropolitan areas in the ordinary life of the society. Yeah. And that makes it clear that we're not emancipated. That we actually, everybody needs emancipation.
Just like the rest of us.
Exactly. Dolly Parton's absolutely right. So everybody needs emancipating from the family and marriage and God knows what. But you can't make that demand until you've got equality.
Yeah. So going back to our chronology then, I mean, I guess overcoming sort of the AIDS crisis, that must have been a very important moment to steel the gay movement, I think, and to steel sort of gay thinking against, well, all these sort of vacuous accusations that it was like, curse them God and stuff like that on the gay community. I mean, it must have been a huge moment in gay culture, the response to the AIDS crisis.
Well, it was, but it's very contradictory in the sense that the government's line was that don't die of ignorance. Everybody is at risk. I took a very different view. I wrote a pamphlet with Michael Fitzpatrick called "The Truth About the AIDS Panic," where we said that it wasn't true that everyone was at risk, that only high-risk groups were at risk, i.e. intravenous drug users, people who'd been travelling in Central Africa, and homosexual men were at risk. Nobody else really was at risk. That's what we argued. And in terms of the progress of the epidemic, we were proved right. Historically, it's turned out that we were absolutely right. Now, this when we published that in the late 80s,
but it's not the point was it wasn't exclusive to gay people. AIDS virus. That was important.
Well, no, but the point is that the argument that that led to the idea of it actually intensified the idea that it was a gay plague. The government's response, and that led to the clause 28. It actually led to reactionary. The idea that everyone was at risk led to a focus on homosexuals as being the source of this terrible disease, right? And so the gay organisations and gay lobbying groups and so on actually went in line with the government that everyone was at risk. And they did that in order to garner funds from various public agencies and so on. And that was kind of necessary for them. Subsequently, great irony, subsequently they had to then campaign for the regaying of AIDS. Well, they called the regaying of AIDS.
Go on.
Well, they had to try and argue for a proper focus on the homosexual community as being a special and necessary focus for finance and so on, and assistance in relation to fighting the infection. Because, of course, in Britain, almost nobody other than gay men was affected by AIDS, or people who'd received infected blood products, or people who'd been infected abroad. Overwhelmingly, I forget what the figures are, but they're in Mike's pamphlet and my pamphlet. Overwhelmingly, the infection was concentrated among gay men. It didn't exist outside the high risk behaviours.
But there was a degree of moral panic.
There was a degree, absolutely. But that moral panic then resulted in the clause 28, which then resulted in Stonewall and the whole struggle too. So it was a contradictory series of developments. But it resulted in the mainstreaming of the discussion of homosexuality in a positive way.
Right. So from a sort of a very tragic set of circumstances, there was some positive consequences.
Absolutely, yeah, there was, and Stonewall is a product of that. Right, the mainstreaming of the discussion of homosexuality. Now,
you mentioned the major. So we'll move on to the 90s in our part of history. So. You mentioned the major government and its attempts to introduce equalisation, but you said it was because of due to the sort of nature of the government, and the Conservatives were in demise at the time, and the House of Lords were against.
Yeah, the Tory party was, broadly speaking, much more reactionary than their Prime Minister.
Yeah, so it was in the 90s then. Do you think there was new economic developments, new developments in the nature of capitalism that led to sort of cultural shifts which further enable gay movement?
I think there was. I think I think there was the completion, or not completion is the wrong word, but the fulfillment of all these trends that had been going on. So the 90s actually saw the end of the kind of the decisive end of the industrial life, the decisive end of the role of the working class being present in society in a political way. And which
we're still living today, I think, yeah.
Exactly, and the fracturing of those old certainties. So the 90s was a period where sections of the left had to come to terms with that. And in fact, Major is trying to come to terms with it. Major is not supporting Clause 28. He's not supporting any of these repressive measures. He's trying to fight against it. Blair comes in, is absolutely decisively against traditional notions of class conflict and so on, and in favour of the modern economy and in favour of the modern dispensation. So Blair comes out with these statements like, no bosses and workers anymore, we're all on the same side. Now, obviously, only a multimillionaire can believe such nonsense, but it represented a reality, a political reality. So the kinds of process I'm talking about, the very large process that takes place significantly from the late 50s right the way through to the ends of the 80s, is the destruction of the industrial world and the kind of culture that went with it.
And do you think that has been a positive thing then or a positive contributor to progressive gay?
Well, one of the things that the left has, broadly speaking, never been able to deal with is that you only get gay emancipation in highly advanced capitalist societies, which are post-industrial. Everywhere else you get repression, and that is true to this day. Everywhere else, apart from in advanced capitalist societies, post-industrial societies, everywhere else you get repression of homosexuals to this day. And that's a very interesting...
It's interesting for a Marxist well, I mean, that's a different discussion maybe, but yeah.
Right, but I mean, I think that's entirely consistent, because the nature of atomization, the nature of not living, having to live in a traditional family, in a traditional working class community, in a traditional industry, in a mining village, or in an industrial neighbourhood, whatever, with the trade union and the working men's club and all of those things, was absolutely necessary if you were going to be out and homosexual. Right? You couldn't be free in that. So
no, you would get beaten up.
Quite. So the process of individuation and so on, bewailed by the left, and atomization, bewailed often by the left,
and the right, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, is actually something that makes the emancipation of homosexuals possible. When the whole of economic life was bound in the family in an artisanal sense, certainly up until the beginning of the 18th century, then homosexuality had no public existence at all. Same-sex relations existed within the court and within the army and the navy, and maybe in the monasteries and the religious institutions, but not in the ordinary life of the society. It's only when society becomes dominated by what Adam Smith calls commercial society, what we would now call capitalism, only with the emergence of that, beginning of the 18th century, in a city like London, do homosexuals begin to appear as a special category of persons. They're not called homosexuals, but there are institutions like Molly clubs and Molly houses and so on, where people who live outside the context of the family as the centre of production actually are able to exercise their desire for same-sex relations.
Yeah, that does sort of go against, I guess, sort of a lot of the things, the shibboleths of the left that you talk about. Like, I mean, the idea that atomization can be progressive. The idea of individualization is a progressive thing. Conservatives and left-wingers will lament that, like left-wingers in terms of wanting a more collective notion of society, right-wingers in the sense of, it might undermine sort of the traditional bonds of family and community.
Yeah, but you see, in the long view, it is the case that capitalism actually removes production from the family and from the homestead into specialised institutions like factories and mills and mines and so on, and that in the process of doing that, in the interstices of that society, it actually opens up the possibility of people living a different kind of life, of having a sexual life not related to
perhaps being candidates for, what the traditional...
Well, they became candidates for the gallows.
Oh, well, yeah, quite. But I suppose talking in Blair when he introduced the civil partnership legislation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you could be... I know a lot of people still have problems with that moment. A lot of people see that as sort of homophobic legislation, given how that moment happened in the late 90s, I guess. What was your feelings towards that? Did you see that as a positive step, or?
Well, it was a positive step. People like Peter Tatchell opposed it for very good reasons. I don't disagree with his reasons, but I support it.
What was Peter Tatchell's position?
Well, it wasn't equality. It wasn't marriage. That was his objection. And he was quite right, of course, but I was all in favour of the civil partnerships came in because of the Church of England. Religious institutions did not want it to be called marriage, right? And that's why under the terms of civil partnership, you could not have religious music or religious words at the marriage ceremony in the registry office, right? That was the provision, and that was then swept away by the equal marriage. But it was merely a religious objection because there was no material difference between civil partnerships and marriage. No material difference really at all. So it's to do with nomenclature and also kind of cultural appreciation. So I was in favour of the extension to marriage, because once you've got equal marriage, you've got equal age of consent, and you've got equal access to insurance and to inheritance and so on. Then you've got legal equality.
And political power and capital as well.
Yeah, you've got legal equality, legal and material equality. And and I'm saying, that is the basis for... Some people oppose that. People like Spiked Online would oppose that because they would say that equality is not important or we shouldn't fight for equality. But the truth of the matter is, before you can fight for something other than equality, for emancipation, you need to have an equal starting block.
On that ground, can I ask, as a fellow son of Erin, what did you think of the equal marriage referendum in Ireland a couple of years ago?
I thought it was extraordinary. The thing that really struck me about it was that every single voting district, bar one, whose name eludes me, but there was one voting district. Right, there was one voting district that didn't pass it, but every single.
It was still quite close, yeah.
Yeah, every single voting, because I expected it to be concentrated in the fashionable parts of Dublin, but in fact, the fact that the truth of the matter is that old cultures, Irish redneck farmers must have voted for gay equality.
I know some who did, yeah. So
when you think about that and what that represents historically, it's just extraordinary. Just extraordinary, and how splendid it is that the kind of clerical fascism of the Irish Free State was finally swept away. Because that's the way I see Ireland, I suppose, is that in the 20s and 30s and into the 40s and even into the 50s, it was a Dollfuss-like. Dollfuss was the dictator in Austria before the Nazis took over, and he was a kind of clerical fascist. And I think of the Irish Free State and then the early Irish Republic as being a clerical fascist regime set up.
Yeah, the distinctly theocratic elements, I think.
Yeah. So the equal marriage thing was an extraordinary confirmation that this was over, decisively over. Of course, it'd been over some time, but it had to be underwritten.
Yeah, and there was a democratic vote as well. There was a democratic installation of equal marriage within the Constitution.
Right. Right.
So I guess we've been talking for quite a while and we haven't even remotely got to the things we planned to talk about. But I was wondering, just in terms of that discussion of the sort of gay liberation, gay activism, and sort of in terms of like sort of the technological and economic developments from, say, from the beginning of the millennium, where do you think we're at now, or how are you feeling about being gay in 2018?
Well, I think that I think it's okay. That's all I can say. But the only people that it is not okay for, I think, is very young people in schools, young teenagers in schools, and maybe youngsters in the universities. And I think that actually they continue to have a tough time because of the. And this is paradoxical. In the 50s, nobody talked about anything, right? But now, because people talk about homosexuality all the time, youngsters might want to come out and be articulate about their homosexual feelings when they're 14 or 13 or 14 or 15.
And what do you think about that?
And I think that's good for them, but it is also catastrophic for them because they then open themselves up
to the internet, to social media,
to bullying in the schools and so on. So I think that gay youngsters have quite a tough time, right? And I know older people often go on, well, it's nothing like we had to put up with. Well, that's true, but everybody's tough time is their tough time.
So says every old person.
Exactly. And so everybody's tough time is their tough time, and it's not transferable.
Yes, it's probably not the best thing to do to hierarchize suffering.
Exactly, it's not transferable or comparable. So that's my view: is that the young gay people have a tough time, and of course, homosexual people who live in less developed capitalist setups, or in
more conservative parts of advanced capitalist setups.
Well, they're not advanced. I mean, that's the point. In advanced capitalist societies, the situation of homosexuals is startlingly improved and improving. In less developed capitalist societies, the old regimes operate. Which is why
you describe yourself once. I heard you describe yourself as a communist who's got great respect for capitalism.
Well, indeed, but that's a long tradition. Karl Marx had great respect.
Karl Marx himself, indeed, yeah.
You only have to read the Communist Manifesto to see that.
Are you hopeful for the left? Are you?
No, not at all.
Oh dear.
Not at all. I mean, I don't know where things are going.
Are you hopeful for progress? Maybe might be a bit more helpful question. Do you think there'll be progressive things in the future? Given all you've seen?
Yeah, of course there will. The mass of people are not fools. The mass of ordinary folk are perfectly capable of distinguishing the way to go in all sorts of circumstances. And I'm not in favour at all of the idea that it's all doom and gloom.
You have faith in people, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I mean, the truth of the matter is that you can see this over the referendum. Everybody's saying, people voted the wrong way and all that. Well, they may well have voted the wrong way, but the mass of working class people do not need to be told that capitalism will not give them peace, enduring peace or equality or anything else. They don't need to be told this by the left. The left spends a lot of time telling people what they already know. right. No, they
so if we don't know, we should be telling people.
They already, the massive ordinary people know that life's not fair, that the rich are screwing them, that the politicians are a heap of shit. The massive ordinary people know all this. They do not need to be told it by the left. Right.
Okay. So I've got one last question. I've taken up enough of your time, Don. Why did you get a tattoo?
Because
so people don't know, Don has got fantastic tattoos of a dragon. Is it?
Yeah, and I've got sailors in the top.
The sailors on the top of his right arm.
Sailors, yeah.
So I'm not going to reveal to you people your age, but I mentioned the year of your birth. But this is a recent.
It is. It's what I call a late life crisis. So that they'll be nice and sharp as I'm pushed into the crematorium. They will not be faded like most people of my age. That's right.
Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for talking.
Come on, Jimmy. Who are you going to fight against when this balloon of yours goes up?
Thank you for listening to The Well. Our theme tune is Love the Government by Old Papa Giraffe and is licensed under Creative Commons. You can follow us on iTunes or your preferred podcast app.
Trotskyists, union leaders, communist union leaders. Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government.